Good evening or good day, fully dosed viewers, whichever time of the day you are watching or listening to this. Welcome to episode 7, where we will be covering, in response to a need, actually, which seems to be there seems to be a lot of interest around this at the moment. But we to this today we this episode we're going to be talking about fermented foods. Andrew,
Yeah,
how are you? It's been
I'm good.
it's
I'm
been a
good.
while.
This topic seems to have popped up on social media, and there's a lot of questions and a lot of people wondering what the heck is this? I mean, fermented food sounds pretty disgusting.
Yeah, why not just drink a
So
beer, right?
yeah, that's fermented chemically. So yeah, so we thought we'd just do a little episode on in the details.
Because we're so dynamic like that, respond immediately.
Yeah,
um, yeah, so welcome back. Like we said, episode 7, we're going to be discussing fermented foods. If you have any further questions, please feel free to write it in the comments or inbox myself and Andrew. You can see that we're very quick and very excited to respond to a need.
yeah,
And we actually love it when you guys drive the content of the show. Actually, it's really, really nice to be able to get requests or interest from people and to be able to answer you on those things directly, because we know at least that
yeah.
that's what you
It,
want.
yeah, exactly.
Um,
That's what it's all about, really. That's why we're doing
yeah,
the show.
that's why the show is here. So, okay, so let's start with what are fermented foods. So we have to understand something is basically like fermented foods are basically um, foods that well that are fermented, right, Andrew?
Yeah, well,
We've been eating it throughout history, and we'll get to that actually in a little bit. But basically, these are foods that in the old days they might have been an unintended process, which would have fermented the food. But these days, it's pretty deliberate, and how they go about it is actually they start adding cultures to the food. So, like
Well,
for example,
not necessarily in all of them. So,
okay,
like if you take sauerkraut, if you want to make
yes, yeah,
sauerkraut at
yeah,
home,
with cabbage, yeah,
all you do is shred some cabbage up and put a little bit of salt on,
yes, yes.
and over time the
The polysaccharides or sugars actually release, and yeah,
exactly,
the
and then
process
the
of fermentation
bacteria
takes
starts
place.
growing.
Yes.
So what they used to use it in the old days as a method to preserve food, where
Yes.
when they didn't have things like refrigerators and stuff, and that's what they used to keep food fresh for longer.
Yes, which we're actually
Not
going to get
fresh, but
into, and
they
and
can
and
preserve.
that's part of the history section that we're going to discuss as to why we are not eating fermented foods anymore,
Mm.
right? Andrew, do you have anything further to add in terms of what are fermented foods?
Uh, well, it's just that it's food that's been
Left
fermented over
out.
a period of time. It's been left. It's not. It hasn't. It usually hasn't been refrigerated, but
Yeah. Well, these days it's a bit more scientific as well, the way they go about creating it, and I'll talk about it a little bit later. But if we move on to the history of fermented foods, during the Roman era, um, the Romans apparently, this is through my
yeah, you're
research.
going all historical on us.
No, well, I want
No,
to
yeah,
show
I'm
people.
interested to know.
I want
I'm
to show
interested to
people
know.
actually that this thing goes way back, right? And so like Andrew said, the history of this is actually, when our grandparents were alive, or well, okay, mine have passed, but my grandparents and maybe great grandparents or whatever, going back, when food technology wasn't what it was, essentially, right, and we didn't have this industrialized food market or industry, right, where you added different preservatives to extend the shelf life of things, etc., etc. What would have happened? Okay, so your gran or your great gran or your great great gran would have bought some fruit, or she would have bought some veggies or whatever the case is, and those things were hard to come by. It was expensive, so if something started going bad or maybe didn't get used up in the allotted amount of time, what did they do? They made a jam, or they made something out of it. In Indian culture, that's where achas and stuff like sort of kind of come from. We eat like I don't know if you've heard of lassi. Lassi is a
No.
yogurt, right? Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. That
Isn't it
like
like a little bit sour?
yeah, that's exactly what it is, and
Yeah.
we actually have it
Okay.
pre-dinner or like as a little bit of a starter. So in actual fact, we're taking in, and we're going to get into what it is, but probiotics before our major meals, right?
Mm.
And the Indians always will tell you, yeah, no, like you need to reduce the heat in your body, and I'll I'll explain what they mean. I'll
Yeah,
explain what
yeah,
they mean, but it's actually like Ayurveda. It ties into Ayurvedic medicine and all of those kind of things. So yeah, we had the Romans, the Indians doing it, the Bulgarians and the Russians. That's where kefir and stuff kind of came from the what is this place? Caucasus Mountain region. That's where it's been identified to have first come from. Um, Ukrainians they used to have raw yogurt, sauerkraut, and buttermilk, and then various Asian cultures would have the fermented cabbage, turnips, soy.
kimchi,
Soy is actually fermented. The ginger, from Asia that we have with our sushi. Um, yeah,
kimchi,
yeah, kimchi, kimchi,
kombucha.
kimchi, kombucha.
Yeah.
Yeah, so the major two that we have today these days that seem to be doing the rounds in terms of the health industry is kombucha and kefir or kefir. How do you pronounce it? What's the proper pronunciation?
I call it kifa.
Yeah, if I look at the spelling, yeah, possibly,
Yeah.
possibly, possibly. Um, yeah. So basically, the reason why we've lost this is because we've become this culture of convenience. So we don't eat these things anymore, and our gut health has deteriorated, basically.
Well, isn't it more from like the whole
And as
mass
well as
every
lifestyle, as well as lifestyle.
everything's mass produced now,
Yes.
and so like I have a lot of clients where I'm telling them to eat sauerkraut, and all they're doing is they're going to the local supermarket and buying
Yeah.
sauerkraut off the shelf,
Yeah, that's the problem, right?
and so the way that stuff is made is it's all done chemically and it's actually pasteurized.
Yes.
So they on purpose kill all the bacteria to extend the shelf life.
Yeah. So
So
Andrew, let's talk about that. What are you looking for? We're going to get into the rest of the stuff, but what are you looking for in a fermented product?
it
Like, firstly,
basically
for
needs
example,
to
you
be
want it to be as organic and natural as possible, correct?
yeah, and it shouldn't be commercially made. It should be made by
Small batch.
like for example the people that I use. It's a lady up in Kloof. It's a region up here that she makes it all herself. She's got good relationships with all the local farmers. She buys all her stuff. Everything's organic. Everything is as natural and as hormone and pesticide free as possible. And she actually said to us that she won't, if she can't get something of the right standard, meaning organic and
Yeah.
hormone and pesticide free, she just won't make the product anymore. So you want something that's basically homemade. It shouldn't be made in a huge production
Yeah.
facility somewhere. It must be homemade, and they actually have to be kept refrigerated.
Yes.
If you know that it has to be refrigerated, then that means that there's live bacteria in there. If
Okay.
something's sitting on a shelf in a supermarket, it's dead, and
Yeah.
it's not going to give you any
Yeah.
benefit.
Okay. So people, you want to look for the most natural form of fermented food that you're gonna
Yeah.
that when you
Sorry about that.
which one is that?
That's
Raiden.
Jack. No,
Jax.
Jackson's obsessed with me. He won't leave my side. So if you look at me looking to the side, it's because I'm trying to keep him off the screen.
That's fine. That's fine. He's part of the show.
He's as
So he's been
natural
there
and as
since day
organic
one.
as they come.
Okay, so that's what to look for, right? And we've spoken about why we don't eat them anymore. But let's ask ourselves now why we should be eating them and what are the benefits.